Okay, this is a short video about taking care of and calibrating a compound miter saw. This is a Delta 36040. It's a 8¼ inch compound miter saw. I've had this for over 35 years. Haven't always taken care of it, and I needed it for a project that I'm working on, a hardwood floor, and I needed to cut a 45-degree miter, and this was going to be my tool. Now I cut my 45-degree miter, and then I went to install it, and what I noticed was it was way off, and it was going to be in a very visible spot. So I was concerned, and I started looking at what could be wrong with my miter saw. And one thing that I had remembered noticing with the miter saw was that when I went to cut wood on it, I would notice that when the wood was up against the fence, that in the middle of it, there would be a gap maybe of about 1/8 of an inch right in the middle, not on the two ends. It was if the fence were like a V. And at first, I didn't think anything of it. But I did kind of notice it, and I wondered why. I wonder why they did that. And then when I realized my 45-degree was off, I said, okay, it probably isn't supposed to be like that. And the thing is, when you're cutting hardwood flooring at 90 degrees and you're just chopping it off, it doesn't really need to be that accurate, actually, because it's going to be hidden. All the rough cuts are generally hidden under the trim at the edge of the room, but this miter cut is going to be highly visible. So what I realized was, when I went on the internet, is that a lot of people are complaining about miter saws where the fence is shaped like a V. And what happens is, normally when you're cutting something to length, you're using the left side of the fence, and you're coming down with your right hand operating the saw, and you're pushing on it. And what happens is it doesn't get pushed on both sides equally, so over time the fence can actually get bent. Now this fence is an aluminum casting, but it still got bent simply because of all this repeated use. And I did notice a guy online who said, take the fence off. So the fence is held on by 2 bolts, or 2 nuts, I should say. I'm sorry, 2 bolts. And he took it off, and he put it down, and he started banging on it with a hammer, banging at this point with this part flat on the ground, basically as if to unbend it. It's like this, and you bang on it, and it flattens out. And he reported success with that. So I tried that, actually, and I banged on it. I was actually able to remove almost all of the bend. And because I thought that it was just going to come back, I decided I needed to take all of it out and maybe even bend it just teeny bit in the other direction, so that when it started bending back, maybe that would provide some resistance to it. Anyway, I banged it a little bit too hard, and it cracked. Right there, it just cracked in 2 pieces. Now, I thought I was going to have to get a new fence, but I also found pretty quickly that this fence is actually obsolete. You can't buy a replacement fence. I was thinking, okay, am I really going to need to get a new miter saw for this? Well, what I finally did was, I got JB Weld. I got these 2 very large nails. I forget exactly what the gauge, the weight, penny weight is on these nails, but they're, you can see, they're fairly big. And I actually curved them just by putting them in a vise or banging it around a lally column, actually, that had about the same radius as this, until I got them into this shape. And then I basically glued them on here, and then I basically filled in the glue in all the other places. And when I was gluing it back, I glued it back, now that it was cracked in 2 pieces, in such a way that there's no gap, okay? It's perfectly straight across. And that seems to be working fine for now. When this is working normally, you don't necessarily have a lot of pressure on this fence, so that it doesn't need, you like to have it nice and square, but you don't need to be pushing on it so much. Now, one reason probably why I pushed on the old fence too much was I probably let my old saw, the old blade, get too dull. So I recently had to replace the blade because I have been using this blade for 35 years. Not a lot, of course. I mean, I'm not in construction or anything. This is just for home projects, but I'm cheap. So I just kept using this thing until I could get away with it. But I had been making cuts that would, on the end, these pieces, that would look like this. So as you can see, the blade was extremely dull. Now, when the blade is extremely dull, when you're pushing down on this to make a cut, you're pushing really hard on that, and that's pushing up against the fence. And that is really probably why I bent my fence. Okay, it was my fault probably because I didn't get a new blade. So I did get a new saw blade, okay? And that, I'm hoping, problem won't come back. This particular new saw blade didn't actually show angle of rotation on it. The saw does show the angle of rotation. This blade, and a lot of blades will have an arrow on it. This new blade just didn't happen to have an arrow on it. I wasn't even thinking. I originally put it on actually backwards. And the first cut I went down to make, it was totally backwards. It was smoked like mad. Fortunately, it didn't hurt the saw. I turned it around, so that's fine. Then I noticed that in order to get a good 45-degree miter now, I had to worry about calibration on this thing. First of all, I had to make sure that since I had broken my fence, that I had to put it back on properly. And the user's manual for this saw does go through a calibration procedure, but I couldn't find my user's manual. I'm sure it's in the house somewhere, but I couldn't find it. Fortunately, this one was available online. On some of the older tools, you can't find them online, but I was lucky on this one, so I went through the procedure. The first step on the procedure is making sure the fence is 90 degrees to the blade. That's essentially a calibration on your 0 degree setting, okay? Because when this is set to 0 degrees, if the fence is crooked, it's not at 0 degrees. So the fence has 2 bolts, and that's what you use a square, and then you tighten the bolts, and that gives you your 90 degrees. Now, this is a compound miter saw, so there's also a calibration for 0 degrees in the other direction, the vertical direction, and that's what this setting is for. And there's a lock nut over here, and this will be important on any sort of a miter because it has to be correct. Those have to be correct in both directions. It's this set screw right here on this one, right there. But then there's an adjustment there. So you set it to 0, and then you can set that screw to so that it comes out at 0 using a square. Okay, you can also set it at 40 degrees, 45 degrees. There's a calibration for the compound miter. That's not important for what I'm doing because I'm not making a compound miter. I'm just making a regular miter. Once I did all that, I found that my miters were coming out okay. So that is all the problem that I had. Now, there is no calibration on this 45 degree. And I did need to set this obviously at 45 degrees here to get the cut. You get the calibration at 0, but the 45 degrees, you're basically just relying on the original indents that are provided by the manufacturer. And in my case, it came out fine. So I didn't have to worry about that. Of course, on this saw, you could set it to other degrees. This will swing all the way to 45 and even a little bit further. So there's no reason why you couldn't actually set a calibration point, but it doesn't call for it in the manual, and I didn't have to do it. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you. And thanks. Bye.